minutes document. Please kindly add your name to the list. Here, I will put the link in the chat for fun. Okay, so hi, there's a meeting right now, and it's the tooling meeting, and that's what we're here for. So looking at the agenda, first thing is, so we have the OpenJS Summit in December in Montreal, which I believe is right after the Node.js Interactive Conference. Does anybody know if it's in the same venue? I don't know. Anyway, so what's that?
I believe it is. Yeah, I took a quick look at the, I think it was the community repo, yeah.
All right, so yeah, so I put in to have a meeting there. So if anybody wants to show up, I think several of us will be there. You know, when we did it last time, there are actually a lot of people that showed up, and I was kind of like, wow, there's a lot of people here. So maybe we should kind of expect a lot of people, and then you know, decide on that agenda closer to the date, of course, but you know, with that in mind, that, you know, maybe we can only cover 1 or 2 topics, and you know, maybe we want to do something like get a wider range of opinions on a particular topic, or, you know, kind of essentially poll the crowd and say, okay, like, what's a thing that you want to see that you don't have? Do you have any, like, you know, burning needs? Maybe just that sort of thing would be a good way to go. What do you think, Ben? You were there last time.
I think that sounds like a good idea. Yeah, we had a pretty good turnout last time. Like last time, it was more that we proposed a breakout session on the topic, whereas it sounds like this time would be more like we're doing our regular meeting but inviting guests. Is that correct?
So there were like 3 choices. It was like a talk, a workshop, or collaboration. And so I picked collaboration, which is what I assumed is like this breakout session, or meeting or whatever.
That sounds good. Maybe we can, like, it sounds like we can maybe go over some of the things we've done as a working group and get a poll from the room of what people are wishing we were doing. So that sounds smart.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, you know, sometime probably early December, whatever the meeting is before that time, we can settle on what we want to talk about. Of course, if anybody has any ideas before then, there's like a tracking issue in our tooling repo about it. And so just throw ideas in there if you got them. Cool. So I want to jump ahead to source maps. So it looked to me like source maps, did your PR get merged?
The unexciting PR got merged, which kind of added the backend machinery to pull it off. But we're like minutes away from landing the one that actually adds source map support to stack traces, which I'm really excited about. So
I didn't realize there were 2 different ones.
Yeah, one kind of exposed it for test coverage and was a way to split it. And it was kind of a way to just split the work into 2 parts because it was actually quite a bit of work. The Meteor PR is, I'm sharing it in chat now. Yeah, there we go. So I have all the approvals. I just need to get tests passing, and Node's test suite, it just needs to be run 3 or 4 times sometimes. Because I don't think I've broken anything in the test suite. I think it's just a little flaky this morning. So, but what this does, to tell you what it does, it basically will listen for source maps inside of code at the time when a module is loaded, either ESM or CommonJS. If it sees the source map, it places it in a cache. And then if an unhandled exception occurs, or if you try to print the stack trace, it walks over the stack and looks for transpiled code and gives you both the transpiled code and the non-transpiled code so that you have the original call site and the transpiled call site in the exception stack trace.
So is this intended to be like an opt-out, or is it always on, or what's the deal?
It's opt-in, so you'll go enable source maps, and then you'll get stack traces that capture and provide a more detailed stack trace if a source map is found. For things like Mocha that already do some source map management, it might mean that they want to think about whether they could leverage that, or if we could integrate more. You might not want to run Mocha with enable source maps on, because I think Mocha does some of its own source map handling. So.
It doesn't, but what it does is it monkeys with the stack. And so I would imagine anything that monkeys with the stack is going to need to take this into account.
Yeah, but it is opt-in, so someone would have to be kind of coming into it. And the idea was that we could expose an API for it, so that if you do want to monkey with the stack, well, actually, it wouldn't affect monkeying with the stack because I don't know. We can talk about that. There's ways we can make it less invasive, or more invasive, depending on the approach we want to take.
What it's doing is it basically looks for itself in the stack and takes that crap out, or tries, because people don't care about Mocha's internals when a exception. Yeah. So if that sort of thing, I mean, it would potentially affect. I mean, so what does code look like if you have source map, enable source maps on, but the code in the stack is not mapped?
It just looks like a regular stack trace.
And and once you reach code that is, then you see this extra info, right?
Yeah, you see a little bit of you see both the original call site and the it kind of looks ugly in chat, but you can kind of see it there.
Yeah, I see it there.
Yeah,
cool.
The idea is that you don't necessarily. The idea is that sometimes you do want to see the transpiled exception call site, because maybe your transpiler made broken code. So it's kind of nice to have the best of both worlds, I think. Mm-hmm. This was what was recommended to me by Yang, who works on the 8 too.
That actually looks really awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm excited about it. It's like simple but powerful, right?
Yeah,
I want Unicode arrow, but you can't do Unicode in Node's test suite, so I went with the less exciting ASCII.
All right. What can you do? 8-bit ASCII, or is it just 7-bit?
I think it's only 7-bit ASCII. I couldn't use any of the special. I couldn't use anything above. I couldn't use like the arrow characters in ASCII either. They all.
I mean,
seem to throw problems in the.
Those wouldn't be valid Unicode, and it would break everyone else.
Yeah, it's probably best to do something that's less likely to break people.
I don't know. I feel like our tools aren't elite enough, and they need to be more elite. And I want to do something about that, but I haven't figured out how yet. Anyway, that's a topic for another time. So cool. So yeah, looks like this is on its way, and then, you know, I imagine it'll probably land in one of the next miners, huh?
I'm going to try to land it today, if I can get the test suite passing, because it has enough thumbs ups. It's been reviewed a million times. And then, yeah, I would love feedback from like folks like, well, I think once people play with it, they'll actually have more feedback. So it's one of those things where we can fix it after the fact. It's behind a flag. But, you know, we might want to expose more hooks so that Mocha could use this to muck with the stack trace. Or
how low level is this implementation?
It's not very low level. The cache isn't JavaScript land in a map, and I ported V8's source map handler, which is written in JavaScript. It's what's used when you open Inspector and look at source maps. And it's much, much smaller than the community library. And it's already in the Node code base because Node uses V8. So it seemed like a good choice. So there's a JavaScript file called source map, which is the V8 source map handling, which can, given the original position, can give you the map position and vice versa. There's a cache, which is in JavaScript. And then we override prepare stack trace, which gets called by V8 when the stack trace is ever accessed on an error object. We actually already overrode this in Node.js for other reasons because we do some mucking around with the stack trace already. So we were able to just kind of piggyback off of prepare stack trace, which can then iterate over each line of the stack trace and do something similar to what Mocha was doing, essentially. So you could imagine that we get more creative and find a way to let someone still hook in, maybe. Or, yeah, I don't know. I haven't thought of the API completely. But.
So why I ask is because the past, I don't know, 4 or 5 months, I've been doing a lot of work with diagnostic reports. And so in a diagnostic report, you will get a stack trace. And wouldn't it be neat if that stack trace could reach into this stuff and give you source maps? And I don't know off the top of my head how it's getting that stack trace, but I can tell you that it's JSON all the way down, essentially, and that reporting stuff is not much JavaScript, and it's like all C. And so that might be kind of curious to, that's not the word I'm looking for, but it might be difficult or weird or something to try to get into that source map cache. Or maybe once you, anyway, not a huge deal, but I would like to follow up with you on how can we make this work with diagnostic reports.
Well, I think there's a few cool things like that, like diagnostic reports. It's not set up yet to handle, you know how you, like when you get an exception in Node, it puts a little ASCII arrow below the part of the source code that had the exception call site happen. You know what I'm talking about? Like Node just kind of injects that into the error, and that doesn't have source maps applied to it right now. Source maps don't yet work with when you have the REPL open, and if you were to require something with a source map that then threw, that's a super easy fix. I just left it as a to-do, and like that'd be a great thing for a Mentee or something to do. Like it's probably like, that's a few hundred lines of code, or actually a few dozen lines of code probably to make it work for a REPL. Mm-hmm. So my hope is that people use it and then complain, and then we can make it better. So this is very much meant to be an MVP.
All right. Well, yeah, I'll follow up with you and look at that with the report stuff, because that would be neat to get working too. All right. So
I had a quick question before we move on.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, this is awesome, and I'm super excited to play with it. Tried it with TypeScript. Is there any chance of this getting like backported to Node 10, or is it just going to be Node 12 only?
I mean, none of the code is that. I don't know. I wasn't planning on backporting it. I think it's one of those things where we're probably going to iterate on it for a few months. So I think we end up backporting the initial work and then be having to backport every iteration as we figure out a better API for it, since it's experimental.
Right.
So I think it's maybe more of a thing in the future. I mean, certainly if someone wanted to take ownership and start backporting it, I don't think there's anything that would make it particularly hard.
I'm mostly just asking because I want to use it. But I guess Node 12 is going to be LTS like right away here. So probably just a good excuse to upgrade.
Yeah. Hopefully it lands in LTS. Yeah, because we're starting to release 13 now too, right? So, yeah. Cool.
There's nothing in the V8 in Node 10 that would, or
it depends on if we're already using prepare stack trace in Node 10, and I think we are. Like most everything's done. There's this method. There's this hook that V8 itself exposes for mucking with the stack trace that Node overrides, and then becomes a really good entry point for fiddling with the stack. which I think is what a lot of userland modules do as well, because they can monkey patch it. Assuming that the prepare stack trace is in 10, which I believe it is, then yeah, it shouldn't be too hard to backport this. Except someone suggested I use private fields for one of the classes I made, so I might have to change those back to not being private fields. Did private fields land in 10? I don't know when private fields landed.
That's the Node 12 feature.
Yeah, Node 12 feature, okay. So you'd have to get rid of the private fields.
All right. So moving on to a better way to detect a process is exiting. It looks like there's been a little bit of activity in this issue, not too much, since we met last. Corey commented, and then Shan Can Code commented. Corey, is there anything anybody wants to talk about on this particular topic?
Well, I've spent a little bit more time in the NYC code. And as far as NYC's purposes go, I think I found a way that we can eliminate our need for async exit handlers, because I know that's definitely adds a lot of complexity. I think that it would be nice to eventually be able to run async code in an exit handler, but as of now, I'm not sure the best way to accomplish that. So I think I need to comment on the issue again, but I think that just trying to have Node.js provide a standard way to install an exit handler that, as far as the application is concerned, won't interfere with things like the SIGINT handler and other signal handlers, would be really great.
Does your solution have, it looks like it might have something to do with worker threads?
Well, no, that was an idea for how Node.js could theoretically provide a safe async functionality for the exit handlers. The problem is once the exit handler starts, theoretically, if there's still stuff on the event loop, you don't really want to process that. But if you start running async code in a new event loop, you don't want that async code to wait on something that will never resolve from when the application was running. So that's where the idea of the worker thread came from, is that essentially a worker thread kind of runs in isolation. But like I said, as far as NYC goes, basically I just found a way for the child processes to simply do less work. And essentially the big concern for me was processing of the source maps, which my plan at this point is, instead of processing them in the child process, I'm just going to record them to the coverage file and make the main NYC process just handle everything when the test is completed. In the case where NYC caching is disabled, this will definitely result in more data being written to the disk, but I think it's a worthwhile trade-off, especially since even if async exit handlers were implemented right now, it'll be a long time before we drop and Node 10. So I think for right now, we have to work within what signal exit can accomplish. And just in the newer versions where native exit handlers are available, we'll just prefer that over the user space module.
I was going to say, like, I'm definitely more excited about. I'm concerned with the complexity of an async exit handler as well, and I'm more excited personally about just having a exit handler that fires in all cases where Node's about to shut down. And it really feels like, maybe the devil's in the details, but it feels like we're already pretty much there, because we write like diagnostic reports when Node shuts down, like process information. We write source maps when Node shuts down, and we do this in all exit scenarios. So really, I think if we just added an additional JavaScript hook that can execute if it's wired in and it executes at that exact same time, and we'd be outputting either coverage or other inspector information as the inspector session shuts down. It feels like we could just call that hook pretty safely. So, and I mean, if it's opt into, it's not always happening. Like maybe some of the concerns around, like I'm sure some of the concerns are like, what if you start an infinite loop as that fires or something? But I mean, you could do that. You can start an infinite for loop on an exit handler today, would just not break signal exits. It feels like something that should be easy to implement.
Agreed, and there's only so much that can be done to prevent the exit handler from blocking exit. And I mean, for example, right now, we could use signal exit to call a child process, exec sync, and run a process that never exits. So it's already possible to block the exit permanently. So I don't think that's something that can really be addressed.
I mean, my question becomes, should this be the behavior of on exit, right? Like maybe that's, but it feels a little weird introducing a new method that's like on always exit or something. I don't know what it would be called, but it feels like this is, I think as a user, this would have been my expectation of how exit behaves, like that a fatal signal would cause me to get that hook as well. And I was a little surprised that we needed to build that signal exit library, which I built actually. And I did not know a thing about signals and was just trying to solve a problem. So I then had to learn about signals and was surprised that there wasn't already a signal handling library that already did this. And, it was not that I knew much about Unix and wanted to build this thing. Isaac actually gave a good talk at NPM about it because I was busily bugging him about everything he knew about signals.
All right. Anything else on this particular topic? All right. So argument parsing is on here just because it's so we don't forget about it, but I don't think there's anything going on there unless somebody wants to say something about it.
Well, there is the comment from Isaac, the latest comment in there.
I did not see that.
Oh, well, I think it's the kind of basically he also have the against it argument that we have heard many times. I don't think like the group has the same view on that, but one of the suggestions is just providing like a main args, process.main args, just to replace the clunky arg, right? And I think it does move the conversation forward, but it's not necessarily the full argument parsing that we want. I wanted to hear the sentiment from the group on that idea of just like having something better than the argv's lies, but it's not necessarily an argument parse library yet.
So it looks like what he's suggesting is what Isaac is suggesting is instead of having process args like slice 2, you would have process.main args, which would be that, just to make things slightly nicer. And I mean, that seems like a quick win, but I mean, I don't know. Is it even worth doing? What do you think?
I have the feeling that it could be worth doing, at least moves the conversation forward, right? We can start getting some feedback from the rest of the node contributors in that. And it's definitely easier to champion than the full argument parser.
Yeah. I mean, would somebody want to champion this? I'm not sure I feel strongly enough about it that I would like sit there and argue into GitHub all day.
Could you go a step further? And I mean, you already have process dot exec, or you already know the bin that was actually used to run whatever code you were running. But like, could we split out the actual bin running, the thing it ran, and then all the arguments passed to it? You know, like have just split it, remove all need for slicing, essentially, right? I don't know. I think that's cool.
Yeah, I think I'd like to give it a try to something like that. But if the group agrees, if you all think it's a good idea.
Oh, I mean, I'd certainly back it. I mean, anything that moves the needle seems good to me. And if you're looking to get more code in Node, I think it's probably something very straightforward and that you could send over. So
it might be interesting to do it as have it return an object that has the like the main args, which are in an array, and then the bin that was the original exec bin, and maybe like if there was, or maybe you could even split it out one step further and have the dashed args, the non-dashed args, and then the bin. Maybe that's getting too complicated. Now I've written a
I would go for the minimal thing.
But what I was going to say is if you made it an object, though, then you could imagine instantiating that into an actual parser that works more like Minimist, but you've got like the baby step that's not a parser like Minimist, but the return type wouldn't have to change significantly. So that's just my thinking. And we don't start dumping a ton of things onto process. Which would be, I guess, one of my concerns. Like maybe do it as an API instead of as something on process. That could then be extended into an argument parser.
Well,
I think it's worth.
Definitely you should give it a shot. And I mean, I wouldn't worry too much up front about what exactly it does. Just do it, and then it'll get hashed out once that PR is put up. So
one other idea, like maybe you did all that literature review of finding out kind of the similarities between the different argument parsers and what a minimal argument parser would be. You could start maybe as like, what about a little testing harness that said like, look, these argument parsers comply to the common convention and these ones don't. And it might first prove the fact that most of the argument parsers in the wild behave the same. And two, maybe you convince a few that don't behave the same to add one or two different features that get them to that same baseline. And then maybe once you do have this test suite where you're like, look, everyone adheres to this baseline, then you can say, why don't we just make this baseline a feature in Node.js, right? It's kind of, I'm creating a 6-month argument, but I'm creating like a 6-month, like, go fetch me some wool from something. And then, but.
Right. Yeah, fetch quest.
Fetch quest. Yeah.
That was actually somewhat of my suggestion for the glob path matching, was that essentially start from building out a spec and building out like test to prove a spec and identifying the edge cases where the current userland modules don't match up and seeing if we can nudge them closer. Anyways, just wanted to mention that.
I think that's going to be a good strategy because what I've definitely seen is when there is some contention in what's popular, like there's a bunch of argument parsers, probably 5 really popular ones, and there's 2 or 3 globbing libraries. Folks will say, well, there's we haven't actually agreed. There's some significant differences, but the differences are usually less significant than you think. I believe. Like I think like Minimist and Yargs are the exact same parser, and I think Commander is essentially the same parser. So like if you can prove that, well, actually these things are all the same, it becomes easier to argue it maybe should be in core, which I like.
So has there been like a precedence for this sort of strategy? Because my worry is just like it's a long game, right? It's a lot of work, and there's absolutely, of course, there's no guarantee that it'll ever pay off. And I mean, if there's a precedent, I would definitely feel better about trying that.
Conventional commits, which I wrote up the specification for, is definitely, I think having the specification has helped increase the popularity of that methodology, because I like started by writing a spec for it. So I thought, and what's the other example? I mean, it definitely helped getting coverage into Node.js that V8 supported it, because you can point to V8 and say, look, V8's standardized this. They've made it part of their platform. Specifically writing a test suite, though, like this and pointing out the similarities, I don't know if that's been done.
It's an interesting challenge for this particular thing, too, because essentially the test suite program for each library is entirely separate because they have very different APIs. So it becomes like, am I aware of what features it has as much as anything? But that gives you an opportunity to invite the authors to join the test suite, I suppose. But like, I'm not sure how different that is from just going, having a table of features that you go through and, say, yeah, it supports this and it doesn't support this. And like, I'm not seeing what the code test suite in this case gets you, because there's no way to automatically test it in a generic way.
Yeah, that's a fair point.
There probably are some corner cases which you can really only determine that way, as far as like, some of the weird details, like the triple dash thing that Isaac brought up.
I missed that.
Oh, in his long list of things that you need to define, he basically made a list of like, here's all the weird features that argument parsing has. And one of them was, okay, what do you do if you only get a single dash in front of a long argument? What if you get 3 dashes in front of a long argument? Most of the node parsers treat all of those as just a single, the same. Those are treated the same. It just goes, yeah, strip all of the leading dashes, then look at the thing.
Yeah, and that's fine if they treat them all the same, and then it just means that's a question we don't really need to answer, because
right. I mean, he was just saying like that's a question that any parser has to like answer, right? You have to choose one of those. You have to choose something to do with that. Now, the idea of like, I think it, this is where like, I'm not sure that having a test suite helps, but I think having a document we can point to that's like, here's 99% of the parser downloads, across these 3 modules or 4 modules or however many. And this is how they handle, they all handle it the same. Then we can use that as an argument that feature should be in core.
Right. Yeah. I mean,
it becomes a research project rather than a
right. I mean, there has been, I did do some of this
Yeah.
work. Certainly
Yeah.
I didn't cover everything that Isaac brought up.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah.
For what it's worth, I wish some of those edge cases just never come up. Like, I've been running Yargs for 5 years now or something, and like no one's ever been like, I wish your triple dash parsing was better, and that's never happened. Like,
yeah, it's something where users don't have an opinion because it's an error.
Yeah, exactly. Like,
and if it happens to work, they're like, oh. And if it doesn't, they're also okay with that.
Yeah, and there's a few cases like people rarely do like the single dash and then 10. Well, in the Node community, people rarely do that. I think that's more common in some Unix tooling.
Yeah, BSD tooling is very fond of that.
I think because we've standardized around things like Minimist and commander, et cetera, in Node, we've kind of driven behavior too, because all the command lines work similarly. So
I was going to mention GNU tools often have the short options. And for example, I'm thinking of like make. I'm used to, make dash KJ.
or
So
like
essentially dash KJ would be two short options in a row. The K meaning don't stop on errors, and the J meaning run parallel build.
or like RM-RF, right? Like we use them all the time, but we just
Or
think as a,
ls anytime you use ls.
Exactly. So I'm not sure I agree with the idea that the combining of short options is irrelevant.
It's just not been a feature available in most Node argument parsers. So therefore, we don't have it in our tools very often.
anyways,
Which doesn't mean we shouldn't have
Yeah,
it so
sure.
far.
This has kind of been, I don't know, didn't we have a straw person argument parser pull request to Node at one point? Did you do that, Roy?
No, I never sent it. It was just a pull request to my
Yeah.
own repo just to open the discussion.
Yeah. Well, I like the idea of just building on what I like the idea of the super minimal thing, especially if it was something we could extend on. I like the idea of maybe taking what Chris did and turning it into a rubric, maybe, because people like rubrics, and then you can, just like browser compatibility, see your command line compatibility and make an argument for some set of features. I think that could be compelling. I don't know, it's not the end of the world if it takes 6 months to build it. It's valuable.
Yeah, but I still like the main args, or whatever you want to call it. I think that's something that should happen, regardless of what goes on here. So
Yeah, I'll keep the group posted.
okay, let us know if you want us to take a look at something too.
Yeah.
Okay, so last thing, Ben snuck UUID in there again, so let's hear it.
Snuck. I don't know if I see. I presented UID at TC39 this week, and we got to stage 1. So we're officially actually thinking about it. Which is, stage 1 basically means we're just starting to flesh out the API surface a little bit more. But people were quite excited about it. One company was talking about the fact that they use it for tons of their infrastructure, and it would be really useful for them to have it available. Another company was saying that. I don't know. There's way more consensus than I would have thought that it's a pretty good idea. Maybe the most interesting thing to come out of it was I'm going to now be updating the proposal to. I'm going to be updating the proposal to actually talk about standardizing randomness in JavaScript. So we don't actually have a secure random source in the JavaScript platform. We have like secure random bytes in some of the browsers. We have secure random bytes in Node.js, but we don't have an officially standardized random way to create an actual random number that's cryptographically secure, which means that actually it's hard to make a UID at the language level consistently. Because UIDs rely on randomness. So it brings up an interesting problem that it would be really nice for the language and for all tooling to have a standard way you get randomness, and then you can build a lot of things on top of that randomness. So I thought that was an interesting thing that came out of the conversation.
From what I understand, and I know next to nothing about cryptography, but randomness is very difficult to pull off, especially when you're working with things like containers and virtual machines. And so, I don't know, whatever comes out of here, I think there's probably wants to be some sort of limit on, minimum viable level of randomness.
Yeah, I think it's gonna be an interesting conversation. Like I'm basically gonna have to find someone smarter than me in cryptography to start talking to about it. So it's probably gonna be a big project. I mean, it would be amazing. Like Chrome does have a Node has a cryptographic API people rely on. Chrome has a cryptographic API people rely on. People are running Node in containers and using that cryptographic API. So it's a good it's a good thing to think about. And like if we did standardize it, it probably would benefit everything across the whole community if we knew the way I understand it works. And I don't just slightly more than nothing is basically like the things like urandom will actually block on their response until there's suitable randomness in the machine. And randomness might be, I don't know, heat, might be like it's any number of like the random entropy sources that you might have on your computer. And there's actually, the computer actually keeps track of how much randomness is currently available, and then will not return a random value to you until there's actually enough entropy in the system, which is fascinating. But like you say, like if you're in a little short-lived Docker container, where's your entropy coming from, right? Like it's kind of.
I think I remember reading about this on Hacker News or something. I was like, wow, that's really interesting and terrible that your Debian box or whatever won't start up because it's not random enough.
One really super fascinating thing too is that if you use math.random, which is kind of the naive implementation, and then you try to make a UID out of it, you'll actually get collisions every, I think, 64,000 items or something. Like math.random is not at all random. It's very not random.
So one question I have about this, if I assume that the intent is that this would ultimately be available to unprivileged web browser code. Is that an accurate assumption?
Yeah, that would be the goal. It would be that there's a safe way without leaking any information. Like you're not getting any information about the system. You're not able to. You're not. Spectre is always a concern in any of the new APIs that get created. So it's always like, can we do this without providing a place where you can observe system state in such a way that it's actually creating randomness? So maybe the answer is it's impossible. I don't know.
So actually, my concern would be that this would create a way where a web page could essentially cause a denial of service attack on your own workstation. Basically, what happens if a web page intentionally starves your system of entropy?
I guess it depends on whether or not you're providing an entropy source or if you're providing seeded randomness, which seems to be the more common strategy. To essentially you use your entropy source to feed a recursive series of encryption calls. So you're running it through a cryptographic function to
so you're still
expand
gonna
that out.
You're still going to be a pseudo random number generator, but with a more randomized seed, I guess. And I mean, I don't know, there's a bunch of mathematical stuff that I don't know inside and out. Like you need to make sure the sequence size of your pseudo random number generator is bigger than your UID you're generating, which is where a lot of people run into issues because the cycle size is actually less bits than the number of bits you're trying to put into your UID. So like tons of foot guns, which is why I think it would be a really valuable thing to standardize.
Okay, but if I'm understanding correctly, you're saying that, for example, asking for 100,000 UUIDs would not ask for entropy 100,000 times. Basically, that one page requesting the first UUID would need entropy for that first one, but then moving forward, it would be pseudo-random.
Right.
Okay. Thank you.
Now I'm gonna have to Google entropy starvation.
Yeah, I'm assuming this got me super curious about how Chrome's doing it today, because they do have the random bytes implementation in Chrome. I wonder what the heck it's doing behind the scenes.
Sounds kind of like grain entrapment.
I mean, it's probably doing what OpenSSL does, which is what I described, to the best of my knowledge. Well, the last time I looked into it, that was how it worked. Of course, there are all of those OpenSSL fixes.
Yeah. Where math.random really went wrong is it's only a 52-bit value. So apparently, like, there's a great paper about how small the cycle size is in it, which is really bad for UIDs.
Quantum entropy enhancer. Wow. Can you work on that?
Bring that to community. Yeah, maybe I'll.
Yeah.
Anyways, I feel like I've derailed this a bit, but I think this is
Anyway.
Yeah.
All right. So, okay, we have 7 minutes. Does anybody want to bring anything else up, or you want to wrap it up? Sweet. I hope that was enough time for you to answer.
I just want to, I don't know if we necessarily need to discuss this on the call, but is there any overall plan for testing of native modules, which theoretically is going to drop the experimental flag soon? Is there even a single test framework that will run native modules?
Cap does, I know. I imagine some of the others may. I don't know. But I know Tap has options for that.
Yeah, well, TAP will test with the user space ESM module. I guess what I mean is to actually test without the flags.
No, it has support for the experimental modules as well.
Oh, I did not know that. Thank you.
Yeah, Mocha, there's some work happening there. I haven't paid too much attention to it recently, but Mocha does, yeah, it works with, JDD's ESM, but yeah, people are looking at it, and those people are not me right now. So, do we know when that's gonna become unflagged? No.
I think they're trying to get it unflagged for the LTS, but I'm not sure that the go no go has been resolved yet on that.
From what I understood, it couldn't land until the next one, but maybe I misunderstood. Wait, when does 12 go LTS?
End of the month, I think.
Right, yeah, it looks like the 22nd. So, all right. Okay, cool. Yeah, that's what I know about it.
Yeah, I've been gradually trying to make the C8 test coverage thing work with native modules. It kind of works.
When you said native modules, I was extremely
sorry,
confused.
I mean, ESM modules would be a better probably way to say it. WASM, like WASM's another thing that's what I consider a module.
Yeah, native modules, I think, NAPI and
yeah,
and C++. So, yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Cool.
Anything else?
Thanks for running the meeting.
Yeah, such as it is.
Cool.
Okay. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thank you.
Oh, one more thing, Ben. Please bug somebody if you need more information about who you should bug to get access to run this meeting if I can't be here.
Okay, yeah. I think I know who to, I think I'd bug Richard probably, right? Richard.
I think you want to ask actually Brian.
Okay, I'll find someone.
Brian, so he has the keys. Brian Warner, bwarner@linuxfoundation.org has the keys to the stuff. So.
Awesome. Take care. Roy, feel free to loop me in on the command line stuff too. I have like no spare time, but I think it's a good idea. So.
Sure.
Yeah. Fine.
I'll definitely.
As long as you're doing all the work, I'll just chime in with no context. I know it's very useful. All right.
I'm interested in helping out with source maps too, Ben. So maybe let's chat.
Oh man, I've left like a bunch of like known missing features, so I'd love help.
Yeah. Send me, share the list. I'm happy to help.
Cool. Awesome. Take care.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Right, bye-bye.